Good afternoon. Today is Sunday, August 2nd, 2020. My name is Abigail Frawley. I'm a recent graduate of Long Island University Post-Psych program, and I am lucky to be here with Dr. Danielle Knafo. She is a renowned author, sought-after professor, master clinician, and my goal here today with our conversation is, we're in a pandemic. I have been speaking with many also newly minted psychologists during this time about how we need guidance. My colleague group is confused and feeling adrift. So my goal in beginning this hopefully series of conversations was to start that conversation, written extensively on how technology is changing our object relational landscape. And clearly we're seeing that these days. You've written about people that choose to do more of their living online. Now we're in this strange time where we are all forced to do that living online. So we could start there.
Yes, that's true. I've written a lot about technology, but I always say that I'm a tech phobic a little bit, but maybe that's why I write about it, to help myself. But yes, I think you put it well, that some people in the past were choosing to go in that direction, and now we don't have a choice. This is what we have to do, and so we have to adapt and accommodate to this new way, the new normal, or what I call the new abnormal.
I like that. I like that.
The new abnormal of working either by phone, Facebook, Skype, Zoom. And how does it change things? How does it keep things the same? Obviously, we want to maintain some form of continuity with our clients, and any way we can do that is good, right? But does it change? Yes, it changes. Just the very fact that we are not two bodies in the same space has to be different. Right, we don't have the full cues. Look at us. We
right.
see ourselves from
I was just thinking that.
these heads, talking heads. We've become talking heads, and we don't have all the body language cues that we usually do. There's an intimacy of being two bodies in the same room. We see the significance of bodies when we don't have them, right? At the same time, there's a certain intimacy that is created when, like for example, right now with us, we're in our own personal spaces. So there's
both our books in the background.
Our books in the background. We see there's we get to see each other's personal space. Sometimes it's closer up than it might be in an office, right? There's more space between, and now people can look sometimes too close, sometimes too close for comfort. But the main thing is that when you're working clinically, I'm going to speak psychodynamically, we're working about, this is an encounter. It's an encounter between two people, or between a person with a couple or a family, however many people are involved. And what we try to do is create a space in which to think and reflect, both about ourselves and about the interaction. And that is something that we try to maintain across whatever frame we're using, whether it's in person or whether it's using technology. How do we create this time to reflect and to think about what's going on internally, externally, across our relationship as well? So that is our aim, and whether it's in person or not in person, we try to do that and to establish a space, whether it's in virtual space or in real space, to be able to do that. Yeah.
And how have you been finding, I guess, the difference between sort of taking on new people during this time, which means possibly the first time, maybe not for you, I don't know, first time that you're meeting these people and your entire treatment now is in a remote context. I don't know if that's a first for you or you've ever had that happen because of other circumstances before, but that versus transitioning into this framework with patients you were already working with for a period of time before. Love to hear about that.
Yeah, well, the few new people that I've taken on have insisted on seeing me at least once in person.
Okay.
And I've agreed.
Right.
And I've agreed because there's something about the in-person that can't directly be translated. I know this isn't the case with everybody, but for some reason with my practice, that's what happened. They wanted to, at least the first session, to be in person. And in a way, I'm glad it was. It's a little strange having a session with both parties wearing masks.
Right.
I think that's a little strange, maybe a lot strange. But then we were able to transition to Zoom, because we've had that. Okay, we know there's a certain chemistry, or a certain, people talk about chemistry when they date, but the same thing happens when you're seeing patients. Anytime you encounter someone for the first time, how do you click? How do you, feel each other out? How do you, you look at body language, you look at unconscious messages that get transmitted that are more easily picked up in person than online. And so it establishes a certain foundation that I think then can be moved online. So that's what I've done. Yeah.
That makes sense. I've been hearing from a few colleagues that when they have started with someone completely never in person at all, sort of regretting whether because they couldn't or didn't feel comfortable or whatever the case, or were now out of, in a different state and actually couldn't even if they wanted to, but that not having even that one time in person is just, it's sort of like they're flailing around in the dark because they don't feel like they have any real sense of the person to begin with, so then they can't really sense any shift in anything.
And there's so much uncertainty right now, so much unknown, that to add that when you're looking for help feels like a little bit too much for some people. So I find it's just grounding in a way that allows one to, the therapeutic pair to continue online.
That makes a lot of sense. And how about...
And fortunately, I have a very large office.
Okay, I was just going to ask that. So you were able to easily set it up in such a way that you could do that.
Yeah.
Okay. I have been reading a lot of interesting articles popping up just on the internet of, if you're going to go in person, what will you do? And all these contingency plans of, the person needs to take their temperature and text it to you, and then you tell them when they can come in from the parking lot or from outside, and all these things to try to minimize waiting room and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of things to consider. And even the, I guess, policing, not sure if that's the right word, but of the idea of the temperature, if that were to enter the therapeutic, this is more thinking to when being in person will be more common again, with masks and with everything, to be the one policing, if you had a fever, you can't come in, do you need to wait 2 weeks to see me? Like all of these kind of questions entering the therapeutic relationship is strange.
Well, the body enters in a way that that maybe we can ignore otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The body, two bodies and their effects on each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And how have you found, something I've been wondering about a lot is sort of, certainly, dealing with trauma with any patient, it might bring up things that you yourself have been through, or someone has gone through, or maybe something quite similar. This is just such a unique situation because we're all in this collective trauma at the exact same time. It's attenuated because there's not a clear we're not in the post-traumatic phase. We're still in it now, and there's no clear time that it's going to end. So something I've been thinking about is, how much does that prompt more self-disclosure or more sharing of your own experience, whether that's same or different than the person that you're in session with? Are people pulling for that from you? Are you finding yourself doing it more or less, or all, running the gamut?
Well, I've been in this situation before. Not everybody has, because I lived in Israel, and I was working during times of war, during times of terror attacks. And during these times, everybody was in the same boat. And sometimes you would be, and it was not even like this, sometimes the terror attacks would be unpredictable. You could be sitting in an office with somebody and the alarms are going off. You have to go into a bomb shelter with your patient and your family if you're working from home. And so there's a lot of disclosure. There's a lot of shared experience. And it certainly changes things.
Yeah.
No more neutrality or anonymity or things. So I've been in a situation like this, and we talked a lot about it in Israel, and how it changes the frame, obviously. But you work within the social. We work in these little offices, these little spaces, but there's life going on. There is social events going on, and sometimes those social events are so huge that they intrude upon the relationship, and you shouldn't ignore it. You shouldn't pretend that it's not there or that everything is intra-psychic.
Right.
There is a reality that we're all dealing with. How we deal with it, though, can be different. And how everybody deals with it is different depending on what they've been through, depending on the support they have, depending on the defenses they use. It all determines how people deal with it. It's a mistake to think that everybody is traumatized, however. You use the word trauma. There is a collective, potentially traumatizing situation. Part of it is COVID. There are other things going on too that people are may even feel more traumatized by, whether it's the political situation or the Black Lives Matter movement or the climate change. There's so much going on right now outside of our windows that penetrates, and that's in there, and we shouldn't ignore it. We have to listen for that. We have to see who is more traumatized than others. I've been very interested in who has shown more traumatic reactions than others. Sometimes it's surprising. So some people think that psychotic patients, that I work with psychosis. Some people feel that psychotic patients are the most vulnerable and therefore would be the most traumatized during this time. And I found that that's not necessarily the case, that some of them, they catastrophize all the time. So now some of them feel justified. You see, the world is terrible. There is contamination everywhere. There is, and so they feel validated for their points of view, where some people who were holding it together very well completely fall apart, become anxious wrecks, are afraid to go out. And so there's a much more severely neurotic reaction that I see among some people than among my psychotic patients. So I think if people have a purpose and something that preoccupies them, and they are less needy of the social contact, those are people who are doing better, who are faring better than the others.
It's interesting, as you were saying that, about the being able to be alone with yourself and have that time. I saw a funny article the other day that said something, I think the name of it was back when we were breadheads, and it was making fun of the fact that during the first, I guess, 2 months and maybe even now, there was this mass movement on Instagram, on social media, of baking bread.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone was making sourdough loaves, and every person was baking.
Right.
And it's interesting because I guess at the time that I was seeing my feed was just bread loaf, bread loaf, bread loaf. It brought to mind a lot of things. One is sort of and you've written about this a lot, the social media piece of the comparison game and sort of putting forth this perfect loaf of bread while, meanwhile your house is complete chaos and you're terrified and anxious, but the bread makes it look like you made this perfect thing. And it sort of made me feel a little bit like manic defense. Like there was this flurry of activity and articles even saying, make the most meaningful use of this time. You should be writing a book. You should be exercising more than you ever have in your entire life. And it sort of felt as if the social media move was pushing people into like this flurry of activity to kind of maybe defend against actually sitting with what's happening while also making meaningful use of the time.
Yeah, one can make the meaningful use and be busy, 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 busy. On the other hand, this is a very good time to sit still, to go inward, to reflect. So another thing that I've noticed with my patients is that because they're moving less, because they're in actual motion less, and they're less with people, less interacting with the outside world, they go inward. And that's one of the things as psychoanalysts, we want people to be able to go inward. That's one of the reasons we use the couch, to eliminate any kind of stimuli that's going to detract from going inward. And so this is a good time for that inwardness and reflection. What is my life? What can I do without? Right? We're forced to do without a lot of things now. And a lot of people are discovering that, well, you know what? I really never needed that in the first place. So paring down to what is essential, what really makes me happy, what really entails a good life for me, for whoever it happens to be. And when we have to reduce our interactions, our stimulations, we see that we really don't need all that much to live, to be happy. And so to put the attention on the things that really matter. So there is that going on. But I agree with you, social media has that risk of, there are always some people who are doing and showing and doing, and people compare themselves and feel, well, oh, why do I feel so terrible? And this person is baking the most beautiful banana bread. Why do I feel so terrible? And this person has this exercise regimen that's incredible.
Yeah.
And that's always dangerous. People have to go inward and find what works for them. And that's where therapy can be helpful. To really focus on them, to be in the present. It's a Buddhist moment in a way. What does Buddhism even aim for? That the biggest aim is to be able to live in the present moment, and get rid of attachments, get rid of everything. This is an invitation to be a Buddhist, or at least to learn from that, which is, how do we live in our present moment without knowing what the next moment will bring? That's a truth all the time. We never know what the next moment will bring. We never know if we'll be here tomorrow. We don't know these things, but we live as if we do.
Right. To look inward and to think about those things. And I found myself feeling more defensive of why that is meaningful to do in these times. Like I'm needing to convince people of what the point is, because everyone just wants, well, make it feel better today. So that's something I've been noticing. So I'm glad that you said much more eloquently why this is meaningful, why we need it.
I think that clients who come into psychodynamic treatment, or especially psychoanalysis, they're a self-selected group who already are more comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, because the whole way we work is not prescriptive. I'm not there to tell them what to do, to give them homework, to, you know, it flows. It's a process. It's a process that grows between two of us. And so, and a lot of it is unexpected. Like Beyonce said, you go in without memory or desire. You go in without an agenda. So things are not certain. That's one of the reasons I love this work, because otherwise I would have been very bored by now if I knew what I was going to get every single day of my work life. But I've been doing this for decades, and every day is different. Every day has surprises, and that's what keeps things interesting.
Interesting. So that's the interesting part is a positive for you during this time. Maybe we could shift a little to some of the negative for the therapist, the analyst. Zoom fatigue.
Yes.
Just being drained by these experiences, difficulty in feeling connected despite the use of technology or because of the use of technology, whichever way you want to look at it. Maybe you could speak to those kind of challenges and how you found it to be.
Well, I and many of my colleagues all talk about Zoom fatigue. I had 3 offices, one at the university and 2 private practice, and I used to commute from one to the other. And I don't commute. I sit here, and I am so much more tired at the end of the day than I was when I was running around the place. Yeah. And so there's something about sitting still and the computer, something about the screen, staring at a screen all the time, something about the lack of in-person. So when you meet in person, things vitalize you. Other people, you know, there's an energy that doesn't quite get transmitted the way it does in person on screen. So people do complain a lot about Zoom fatigue. It's hard on the eyes, it's hard on the back, and you have to remain present hour after hour. My advice is to take breaks, not do back-to-back sessions. Take breaks, look someplace far off, not just, you know, as closeness. Move your body. Yeah, I think that. And some people prefer the phone, but not everybody. There are people who really want to see you and want to, you know, as much as one can be seen.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is you are brought into an intimate place. I mean, I have patients who every time they call me, they're in a different room. I see their house, you know, every room of their house, or sometimes they talk to me from their bedroom.
Yeah.
So what does that say? Sometimes, you know, they don't have privacy. People knock on the door and somebody comes in. There are animals. There's something sweet about it because you really get to see how someone lives. Yeah. On the other hand, it can be intrusive. It can intrude upon the process.
I was wondering also if you could speak to either more generally or personally sort of transference and countertransference during this time.
You know, I don't think it's any different than in person. Transference and countertransference exist in every interaction, therapeutic interaction, every interaction, even outside of therapy. Yeah. We bring our feelings, our expectations, our unconscious wishes, everything. Maybe because we're all going through something similar, we feel maybe more of a pull to agree, to express our own, you know, views or experiences with it. People will ask us more, you know, is that the same with you? Yeah, you also, things like that. And we have to be very careful because I think because we're all going through it, it's very easy to get into that kind of friendly back and forth. Yeah, me too. You know, isn't that tough? And we forget that this is still a therapeutic situation, and we have to be careful. I'm not saying never ever disclose, but we have to be very careful, as always, when we disclose, because when we disclose, we foreclose exploration or internal fantasies about who we are.
Mhm.
But I think there's more of a pull to disclose these
Yeah.
days. And I fall into that too. Uh,
Yeah.
but I'm very careful with whom, because there are some patients who will exploit that and or argue it or look for, what do you think? On the other hand, there are people who don't. I have a patient who's a very strong Trump supporter, and one time I said to him, I said, I wonder, if you think about my politics. He said, yes, I do, but I don't want to know. And I was relieved. I was relieved because I didn't want that to become a difficult situation. It's enough that he has that with his girlfriend, and we talk about it there.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I certainly have felt the pull, and even more concretely, here's what I'm going to do for my COVID plan. Like I do this thing, but I won't do this thing. You think that's safe, right? Like, I don't know any more than any other person, sort of a pull in those ways. And particularly with, I guess, contamination phobia, and sort of, again, with this being validating in a certain sense, anyone who's spent their life being afraid of contamination, whether to a really severe degree or less so, right now, I mean, we're getting information every day that would only make us more that way, or at least make us think we really should be quite cautious. And so that's been something that's been hard for me too, to know how to respond to when someone is sort of saying, I think I've reached the more pathology end of this spectrum. And my own neurotics are, my own neurotic thoughts come out, and I'm thinking, well, I do that too. Or, no, I think that sounds like a great level of caution, and then sort of like how to respond to that.
I think it's interesting to see, the risk takers versus the risk averse people these days. And sometimes, again, that can surprise us. And there are extremes on both ends. There are people who, eschew masks and social distancing and being with others, and you have to deal with that. I deal with that. I take that very seriously. Mm-hmm. And then there are the ones who are terrified of moving and talking to the point where it really is unnecessary. Mm-hmm. So I think you see the defenses in both. The ones who are, defending against any kind of danger or risk, or, mortality even, and the ones who are so frightened that everything is a risk, everything is a danger.
Yeah.
And, it's almost delusional,
Yeah.
It's like,
and when it's more on that end, how do you work with that? This isn't just in COVID times, because as you're reminding me, which I'm really glad you kind of keep bringing that point home, that yes, a lot of things are different, but the tenets of doing psychodynamic psychotherapy or psychoanalytic work, those are not changed. So I appreciate that, because I think I get sort of swept up too in this feels so different that everything's different, but it's a really good reminder, I think, for
the work is the work. The work is, what are you, what's the wish, what's the fear, what's the anxiety, what's the defense? Where does this come from? What does it remind them of? Was there another situation where they had to fear for their lives? So that's the work. That's the work. Yes, there's these external forces that are going on now, but we have to take that into consideration. That's the internal work. The external work is, how are they behaving in the world? How are they coping? How are they adapting? This really is a time where we see resilience, or the lack thereof. Mm-hmm. Who are the resilient ones? Who are the ones who adapt quickly and well to change, to adversity, to challenge? Mm-hmm. And who are the ones who, fall apart and can't handle it, become too depressed, become, too anxious, become OCD. So that's where you see where the work has to be.
Mm-hmm.
right? Who needs what kind of work to help them be more adaptive?
Mm-hmm. And obviously this is sort of way too minimalistic of a way to ask this question, but what do you believe accounts for that on a larger scale, for the resilience that some people show and others are really struggling to tap into in themselves?
Well, a lot of it comes from, you know, early life and being given a foundation of safety that they can internalize and take with them,
Mm-hmm.
so that they feel, you know, a certain groundedness and safety and knowing who they are, that they take with them. And it's harder to break that down. We found that in concentration camp survivors, for example. It wasn't necessarily the most physically able people who survived. It was the ones who had this inner strength, who felt loved, who had a sense of self-esteem, and also who had connection with someone, who maintained connections.
Mm-hmm.
So again, these people too, today, those who are able to maintain connections despite the difficulties, despite the challenges, and who have that strong sense of themselves and ability, their confidence that they have the ability to get through something,
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones who are more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
But people who've been traumatized in the past can, you know, this can re-traumatize someone. They have a vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Some people don't know they have a vulnerability until something like this happens. Just like we're discovering that some people get COVID and they didn't know they had a pre-existing condition until they get the COVID.
Right.
And they discover they had a pre-existing condition which made them more susceptible to getting the virus.
Right.
And the same thing happens mentally, that
Mm-hmm.
we don't always know until we're facing a challenge and a difficulty what resources we have or don't have.
Or don't. Yeah, that's very interesting to think about. I think in at least looking at my clinical population, people who were already experiencing anxiety and depression, at least in the beginning, for the first few months, I think actually did much better. Even if those things sort of worsened in a sense, they kind of knew enough about themselves in a depressed or anxious state to be able to sort of step back from it and also recognize, well, it makes sense that I have more anxiety now about going outside because we're facing this pandemic. Whereas the, you know, people that I've worked with more recently, it's like the realization that they didn't have the resources they thought they did. That's what's sort of throwing them off the most, is that they're surprised by how much they're affected. And that is what's really, really sort of eating away at them.
But that can be presented to them as an opportunity to, okay, now you discovered something about yourself. Let's work on this so that you will be better prepared next time life throws you a curveball.
Yeah.
You know, so everything, you know, in Chinese, the word catastrophe has two meanings. One is the destructive and the other is that it's an opportunity for something new.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I
So
like
we can do that in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
How to take something, some terrible realization, and say, okay, well, now we know this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work on this. Let's build this.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that this is a place that needs some work.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I needed to ask you about catfishing, given our work together through a dissertation on catfishing. I've found myself wondering a lot about, obviously, people who were catfishing or living a lot of their life online, I would imagine are protected in a lot of ways because now there's maybe more people to play with in that space than ever. And they're already, you know, versed in doing that. But I'm wondering if there's more or less of that now, even though people are moving to online, if the deception component, how that might be, you know, in the interplay at this moment, if people would still deceive in the way they might have before, or for whatever the reason, less so, given everything that's happening at the same time.
I have no idea. As if you stumped me for the first time. This one, I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are. It's so hard to even get numbers on catfishing. All I do know is that whatever people are doing, they're doing more of it online now. So, you know, people are on internet porn sites much more now. People are probably doing catfishing more now. Right. Because whatever they were doing before, now they're doing it more because more of one's social life or interpersonal interactions are being done online. So my guess is that it would be more. More. Yeah.
Kind of what I was thinking too, but was curious about it. Oh, and also just how long, you know, with catfishing, we saw through our research, catfishers can keep things going for such a long time. And this sort of is the perfect time to keep things going in the sense that they may not be pushed to meet in person. You know, what led to catfish relationships falling apart previously would be, well, I really want to meet you, and the other person would just refuse to keep colluding with it. But now people can't meet anyway.
Right. It can be prolonged more. Yeah. Because there's a good excuse not to meet in person.
Right. You know, now it would be very legitimate, so there would be less to challenge, like, oh, you know, you're hiding something. No, you really have a sick parent or a whatever the case is. Interesting. Well, that might be a good note to end on, unless there's anything we didn't touch on that you would like to add. I think we covered a lot, and I really appreciate you talking with me, and I hope that, you know, my fellow earlier on in their career colleagues will listen to this as a call sort of back to why we are entering this to begin with. You know, I think people are swimming a bit in the discomfort and shame, anxiety, and confusion, but I hope that this will sort of be a beginning to sort of ground back into.
I think the only thing I would add about our times right now is that, you know, I was thinking about this today. I think the meme for this time is I can't breathe. And it's not just George Floyd with his, you know, the policeman's knee on his neck. It's also COVID with all the people on ventilators who can't breathe. And it made me think, like, this is a time where people are having trouble just breathing, just being alive, because we need the breath to be alive. That's how you can tell if somebody's alive. Are they breathing? Right? And what is stopping us, whether it's this pandemic and the threat of it, or whether it's police brutality and injustice. So all of these, whether it's climate change, pollution, all of these things that are threatening our very breath, our very vitality and aliveness that we're very aware of right now. And most of the time we try to keep our mortality out of our awareness because it's a party pooper. But now we can't. We're living with these realities, with these threats to our very sense of being alive. And it's not easy. It's not easy living with that. But I always put another side to it. Sometimes when we are threatened with death, we reach the most important parts of what it means to be alive. And so if we can keep that in mind so that we don't just go to the dark side, and we can keep that this can be an opening too. That's, for the therapist, I think, is very important to hold on to. How do we turn something like that into an opening, into something new, into something that can give us something, not just take something away from us?
I like that. I like that a lot, especially with discussion of what the technology does do to the therapeutic work, to keep, for the therapist to be remembering that this is still an invitation and it doesn't mean
it keeps it going. It keeps something going.
Yeah. It's important to not forget that. and I may have forgotten it a bunch in the last few months, so I appreciate the reminder. All right, thank you so much for joining me. This was great.
Okay, thank you.